Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lesson 9, See Logic for Understanding. Now, before we get into Lesson 9 of class, I'm letting you know now this is the last lesson in creativity, hence the title, because we're moving into logic, and then I'll have a couple other lessons that come out with logic, so on and so forth, as we move down the letters. Now, just to recap, if you haven't seen Creative But Scared, which was lesson 8, by all means, go see that. If you haven't seen the other lessons, such as seeing in between, perception versus perspective, and putting all these things together. The reason why I started off with creativity and it's set up specifically for this way is because, well, you have to, one, understand creativity, and then, well, how do you make sense of it? And that's logic, right? Because yes, art looks beautiful. It even looks better when you apply logic, like the Fibonacci sequence, and then you can see how things come together. So let's keep going into this and things like that. That was my little recap and call out because it's going to take place and everything's going to come together in this last lesson as we move forward. And I have a little action assignment for you at the end of the lesson. So let's start off with the first thing that I want to talk about. Well, what's the difference between creativity and logic? Well, think of creativity as an emotion, right? It's not very logical. And this is why, if you study business or other things, they would say that people buy with emotion and justify with logic later, right? Because anything that was built with creativity normally gives you a type of feeling, right? And then, of course, where did that feeling come from? Well, that's where meaning comes into place. And the only way you can express, meaning or your own logic of the creativity that you just saw is, well, with logic. That's how you describe art and science, depending on what you're looking at and what you're able to observe, right? So creativity is the out of the box thing, right? That people like to come up with their ideas, so on and so forth. Logic makes sense of everything. So yes, you can build a house, but you're going to need the mathematics from logic in order to do it correctly, etc., because it's a geometric shape. Now, why is logic boring? Well, it's because it's presented that way. Quite honestly, one of the things that I've learned, and I've learned this very well if you study history and if you study leaders and tribes and things like that, when people would gather around the fire and tell stories, the best storyteller also got the best message across, and people got to learn the most things from the story, and they got to do their own interpretations. Now, the thing with logic, because there's mathematics, philosophy, so on and so forth, that logic plays into, like science, you know, it's very boring because, well, sometimes the people describing the logic within the story or that are too logical. For instance, if you ever studied to be an attorney, no offense to attorneys out there, I would have loved to be one. It's very logical. And actually, when you take an exam to become an attorney, there's a logic section, but it's very bland, black and white, so on and so forth. Creativity is not like that. However, the logic helps make sense because if you're writing a creative story, you need a premise to the conclusion, meaning you have to be able to connect the pieces to say at the end of the story, this makes sense. And why does it make sense? Because of the logic that came to explain everything else throughout the creative story. So, there are some times where logic, well, for instance, for myself, and I'll use myself as an example, when I was in math class, I was bored a lot of the time. And I got caught a couple times and so on and so forth. And what I mean by that is I was in a physics class and I was getting A's in that class, which you need mathematics for, but I was not doing so hot in actual math class. Why was that? Well, it wasn't until I met a specific individual that pointed out to me, well, because the math that you're learning and the way it's being taught doesn't have a purpose. When you attach a purpose to why that is being taught, why something is being said, like physics, then the mathematics is just a justification for you to achieve the end result. That's the premise to the conclusion. So it makes more sense, similar to following within a story. So that's why one of the things I saw in physics was, cool, you mean I could do this, and this, and I could build this, and I can make an engine, and I could do a car, and blah. That was cool to me. The math part, not so much. So imagine sitting in geometry class or algebra or calculus, and you're just like, yeah, I get it. Sine, cosine, tangent, blah, blah, blah. Why sine spelled that way? It looks like sin. oh no, it's pronounced sign. And I thought that was interesting. And so my brain would go somewhere else. And even looking at physics and history, you notice that sound comes first. So if you were to look at the title here, see logic for understanding, if you were to just say this out loud, people would think, oh yeah, we'll see logic for understanding, but they would think SEE, not just the letter C. So that's where I like to play with creativity as we move forward. And we're going to come up and have some more explanations in this final lesson. So when it comes to how logic helps people understand creativity, excuse me, how logic helps people understand creativity, think Sherlock Holmes for a minute, right? And the reason why is because thanks to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, there is a process that gets taught to detectives, law enforcement, so on and so forth, such as deductive reasoning. Now, there's many books that teach this, so on and so forth, but Sherlock's theory, stands true. And deductive reasoning, you eliminate certain things, and then of course you come to a conclusion. Now, if you apply logic, right? So some people would talk about the different razors within philosophy. You have Occam's razor, which would dictate that, the simplest answer is normally the answer, right? Then you have deductive reasoning to narrow certain things down just in case there's some creativity that was involved. Because yes, you can keep it simple, but sometimes it didn't happen exactly the way you think it did. Think like a magic trick, right? You may see the same effect, but how the effect was accomplished was different. So, therefore, by which you need to have a way of explaining the creative part, right? And that's the logic. And if you disrupt that logic, that's where the art or the science gets questioned, doesn't make sense, so on and so forth, to a certain degree. Now, when we're talking about, other stuff and moving forward, can logic be fooled or can it be false? Yes, until it's proven true. So just like they say, innocent till proven guilty or guilty till proven innocent, logic can make sense until it's proven true, right? Think about the last lesson, right? 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? But 2 times 2 equals 4. That's what logic tells you, right? Creativity says, yes, depending on how you tilt your head, right? Because one way looks like an addition symbol. If you tilt your head, it looks like a multiplication symbol. So, yes, it does. How do I say this? It can be fooled or proven false until it's proven true, and vice versa, so on and so forth. So that's my example there, and that's why I did the little recap in the beginning in case you didn't catch that. And the reason why I state this, and it may be sarcasm, so on and so forth, but it's a method and form of speaking, right? And so if you are wanting to communicate with somebody, you should understand them. And I was trying to get this point across to a couple people, like, you can understand English, for instance, right? But then you have to also understand the terminologies, the etymology, the slang, the culture, because yes, everybody speaks English, but they speak a different form or different type of English when it comes to slang and things like that, and in many other cultures. So when I developed myself in my studies, I put an emphasis on, well, I looked at the map and I said, okay, well, these are the largest countries. These people speak this language here. English is relatively respected and spoken in other places and understood. But then I paid attention to the cultures so that if I needed to translate or if I needed to communicate without words, I understood how to do so because that was, well, interpersonal communication, if you remember that. And that's just logical because even down to the smallest cell, we're always trying to communicate and reach out and move and communicate with the environment around us. So I got a little, in depth with a couple things, right? And I've always wanted to say this line, but it's going to be a little complex, the things that I'm about to share with you here. I've always wanted to say that line. I'm stealing it from somebody. Great. But it's going to be a little complex as we move into logic because remember, we're now taking apart creativity to make sense of everything. Excuse me. So, what makes art valuable, right? So, the thing that makes art valuable is not just the creative part, but it's the logic that comes into play in the person's own mind that makes art valuable. No one knows why a Rembrandt costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Nobody knows why Michelangelo, artwork, or Da Vinci, or these Renaissance artists, their artwork costs so much, but it's not until later, right? And then of course people don't appreciate certain things. They don't value things the same way. If you study Picasso once was asked to do a sketch of somebody, and Picasso was relatively famous, so on and so forth, and many of you probably know this story. But this wealthy man came over and said, "Could you do a sketch of my wife?" While he was eating, he said, "Sure, no problem." He told him the price, etc. In about 15 minutes, he knocked it out, said, "Here you go," and he expected payment. The gentleman with the money got upset because of how fast it was completed. And he said, "Why should I pay you that amount of money for something that took you 15 minutes?" And he said, "My friend, that's not why you're paying me. You're forgetting that it took me a lifetime to learn how to do this in 15 minutes." And that's where the differentiation between a professional and an amateur or a novice and so on and so forth, beginner, intermediate, whatever, starts to segment itself within society. You can see somebody do one thing with the same tools or the same principles or the same words, but it just hits differently, right? And this is where art comes into place. And that's where, they say beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but what it is that, you are, how do I say this? Whatever is valuable to you is what you behold. So I have to understand you so that I understand how to create value for you, so that we can go ahead and create something beautiful. This happens in relationships, so on and so forth, etc. And, vice versa, especially when communicating in dialogue. Now, if you're a logical person, you might ask, why is art valuable? However, if you're a logical person and then you're now in the tech space and you're dealing with finances, well, you have cryptocurrency, NFTs, and things like that. And well, NFTs get treated like a piece of artwork. Yes or no? Well, what makes that NFT valuable? It's the same thing that makes the Da Vinci valuable. The same thing that makes the Mona Lisa valuable and everything else in the museum and in the Louvre and in the library, so on and so forth. You just have to know what to look for. The thing is, when people don't know the story or a correct story that pulls them in, right? And then they find out later, that's when curiosity builds, right? If they don't know the story, then there's no value or perceived value, which is a business term, but the perceived value is not there. It's only after you find out that the value begins to, well, shine, right? And, spark that idea in you, and you say, "Oh, I can make money from this, or this could help me out in this, or this way," etc., right? So if you're logical, think stock market, which is a very logical thing if you're trading, so on and so forth. If you're using AI to help do investigative research on which prices are going to fluctuate, so on and so forth, so you can pick different strategies when trading, that's very logical. So think that way. And now what makes this thing valuable or what's affecting that, then you'll see the chain of events. Or as they say, follow the money, and the money comes from attention, and we live in the attention economy, so why not? So moving forward, can creativity beat logic? Well, I think hands down, creativity beats logic all the time, because logic only comes into play when you have too much creativity. You need logic to make sense of all the creativity. So now that we're moving forward and you understand that you're going to have to start to become more aware and shift your viewpoints, perspectives, and understand and train your perceptions on certain things so you could see and truly read a room in more ways than one. So okay, this is a threat, this is not a threat, this person means this person's testing you, this person's saying this way, etc. Now, once you get through the sound part, try to do it without sound, meaning interpersonal communication, right? Because remember, see logic for understanding. Without looking at the title, you'd get confused on what the first word was, if it was a C or an S, right? So you got to pay attention to things, right? You got to be real specific, because if not, then you're not going to get whatever it is that you're searching for, nor will you find it, right? Same thing goes with AI, right? You can say and ask something, but if you put it into state, you'll be able to get a better answer. If it's able to now know and learn certain things and think critically, it also develops and formulates and thinks a lot better, similar to like a human. And then, of course, it develops from there through the learning process. Now, I'm going to go ahead and erase the board for a second. So, when creativity and logic meet, you could get a couple cool things. And, one of the things you get is, well, science, right? Because you have one way of doing something, right? And that's art, right? I want to build, I want to create, so on and so forth. And the beauty about science is that it's both tangible and intangible. What do I mean? Well, art normally is a depiction of what's in the mind, right? So you have to first deal with psychology, which is a science, right? But then you have to prove it, which is a hard science. So you have physics and everything else to bring everything together now, or bring it to life and things like that. So, like when I were to take, how do I say this? H2O, right? So you have water, you have H2O, and I'm going to get to this in a second. But you have H2O. This could go many ways, but I'm going to try to depict and explain different ways this could go. And the reason why I'm stating this is because one of the things I actually wrote down here, it says, and let me just grab this so you guys can see that I actually wrote this down. Language is logical. How you use it is where creativity comes in. See, what I was talking about earlier when it comes to all the things, when it comes to English and other languages such as Latin, Swahili, and everything like that, Chinese, Japanese, and Russian, Polish, all these other languages, they also have their own slang and their own phrases, dialect, and patterns. So the slang is creative. Words are logical. The meaning within the context is what is creative. So this is where things start to get a little elaborate, because if you're not prompt in the beginning and somebody's leading you on, or your brain moves at a different speed than somebody else's, then it's going to be difficult. And what I mean by moving at a different speed is, you know, some people see this and they say, oh, that's water. They were taught this. I see this and I break this down into so many ways. However, I was brought up and I had different experiences than other people. I'll give you an example that I mentioned earlier. If you ever seen the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, there are two scenes in that movie that stood out to me. The first scene was when the child was taught the idea of playing chess without pieces on the board to keep track of all the pieces. And the instructor gets upset with the child. He smacks the pieces off the board and he says, where are the pieces now? Right? And I shared this part of the story with some other people. But the other part is what really stood out to me, because I always was told, oh, people can't multitask, so on and so forth. They can, depending on how fast their brain operates. And what I mean is there's a second part in the movie where the little boy is moving through the park and they're playing chess in the park. And there's a gentleman in there from the movie The Matrix who played Morpheus. He's playing chess with a gentleman who's supposed to be a master, but he's also talking to him at the same time. And what they realize is that the gentleman that's supposed to be a professional is getting upset with the gentleman that's beating him and talking to him still, which is the same action a child does sometimes when they're talking to a parent. Hey, give me a time. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to process, so on and so forth. And that was the game that couldn't be played because it was only going in a one pace. Whereas the other game in the street was, well, there was the game here that was being played on the board, right? Whether there were pieces there or not. And then the other game was the conversation that he was trying to have with him during the chess game, interrupting his strategic patterns that he would normally be able to take when it comes to outthinking an opponent, because he was being interrupted through verbal communication that was relating to something completely different. So his brain couldn't bounce back and forth. And the little kid started to see this and emulate it, so on and so forth. And he utilized it later on. So that's what I mean, right? It's one of those things where there's levels to this and it does get complex. So when I see H2O and I'm talking about, well, let's talk about art, right? Well, what do you get from water? You get a lot of things. You're able to make paint from it, you're so on and so forth. Nothing on this planet doesn't have or doesn't need water unless it's been dried up, so on and so forth. Not even bloodsuckers would survive without water, right? Now, if we move into science, well, this is H2O, but then it has many different forms. It has a gas, it has a liquid, and it has frost, and then it has an in between. Well, when I look at a snowflake, I see a fractal. In science, a fractal is used to communicate, so on and so forth. And then, of course, you have spirituality. Well, everything in spirituality normally tries to tell you something. And in martial arts, we do something called stick fighting, so on and so forth. And we have heaven and hell, or heaven and earth, in certain things, martial arts, heaven and earth, heaven, hell, so on and so forth, but they both begin with an H. And then, of course, you have this. Well, this is only recognized as O2 in our system, so that means there's one H there. So you have heaven, hell, or heaven, earth, so on and so forth. And the halo could go both ways, because if you look backwards now in science, oxygen, when it just combines to one hydrogen, can be used in things like combustion and things like that. Or if you look at the way the crust in the sky and everything develops with the mantle and the core, and this is how my brain operates, this is part of my process, right? So I'll get back to this in a second. However, even with the O2 and then the one hydrogen up here, depending on the use of the hydrogen and the oxygen, right? It can do many or one thing. It could keep you alive, give you water, keep you cool, so on and so forth, and put moisture into the air. That's the purpose of a humidifier, so on and so forth. Or it could be used for combustion in an engine, so on and so forth, when you have a fuel to oxygen ratio, so on and so forth, etc. This is how turbo systems work inside of vehicles, etc. It forces more air into the engine, so on and so forth, etc. So this is where this goes, but you would only see this if I were to break it down logically, right? Because you're not understanding how quick the creative side can be because of exposure. So the logic helps people explain the art or the science or the spirituality that makes everything, fully connected, right? So let's go ahead and take this a step further, right? So when I'm talking about H2O, I'm talking about this, that, and the third, what makes stuff valuable. If I were to create, right? Let's say I were to make this extremely logical. I'll get back to that in a second. I'm going to make this extremely logical. So with some creativity, right? So I'm going to take AI, I'm going to develop cryptocurrency or have my own little crypto crew. And then from there, I'm going to develop an NFT that I'm going to sell, so on and so forth, and that's going to be attached to some type of value, etc. And then the money that I get from crypto, because crypto, like a foreign exchange, can be exchanged for anything, can be exchanged for the top currency in the world, so I could get the biggest bang for my buck from a digital currency that I never saw to begin with. So now I have AI on my side. What does that mean? Well, I'm now able to go ahead and ask AI to develop a blue ocean strategy to find the value that I could connect to the NFT, or that would be valuable to the NFT, sell the NFT to the crew, etc. And because I created my own cryptocurrency, or I invested in a cryptocurrency that isn't worth much, so much people aren't looking at it, I could go ahead and exchange that for Bitcoin, Ethereum, so on and so forth. Funny thing is that you need gas to go ahead and do that. So you're going to have to understand what that is. But if you're picking up what I'm laying down, this makes things a lot easier. If you have questions, then you could go ahead and ask AI, well, what's gas and why do you use gas to purchase cryptocurrency? And that's, something you'll have to figure out later, right? But even in accounting, right? You have nothing in business is the same as in personal, right? Because yes, you have debits and credits when it comes to business and personal finances. However, within business, one thing is literally the opposite of the other. So what is a debit on personal side is a credit on the business side, and vice versa. And that's one of the ways people stay confused, and so they lose track of the little minute stuff, so that you could pay attention to everything else. And once you understand it, this is why you have CPAs. You can prevent against things like, finagling or gray accounting, as they say. So that was the logical side, right? Now let's go back to creativity. Remember, I wrote H2O and I tried to explain, where does my brain go, right? Well, the theme of a lot of stuff, and only because in another video I said my name was Magic Mike, I decided to wear my Hogwarts alumni shirt. So the reason why was because the beauty of Harry Potter is, one, it connects everything together, but Harry's a positive character that carries a positive charge, who has a lightning bolt tattoo or scar on his forehead. And what's funny is that in H2O, right, the hydrogen is either represented as, well, I wrote it down, the letter P, right? Or it could be HT or 1H plus. Sorry, not T, plus. Because it's a positively charged particle, molecule, etc., atom in the vicinity. So Harry Potter, right? Hydrogen is a plus, right? pH. Well, what else has pH levels? Water, the acidity of water, so on and so forth, etc. If we move forward, well, HP or H plus, which is also hydrogen, Harry Potter was also what? The positive character. Now, why do I find this fascinating? Well, because there's always an equal to negative opposite reaction, right? Equal to opposite reaction in physics, right? The thing is, people don't realize that there's always backup. And what I mean by that is, well, if you go back to science now, you can see that within an atom, there's a nucleus. And within the nucleus, there's neutrons. And those neutrons bond to the protons, so on and so forth. And then the electrons equal the number of protons. So you're always going to have a fight between those two because it's opposing forces. And that creates a part of the energy that happens there. Now you have the neutrons. Thing is, the reason why they're there is because they maintain the balance, right, within the whole structure of things, right? Because if not, you would have the two opposing forces. The neutrons stay stuck to the protons, etc. But it gets a little bit more complex. But what I like to tell you is that there's always backup, right? So yes, physics, there's always an equal to opposite reaction, right? And if you watch Harry Potter, so on and so forth, you realize along the way, he gets backup, so on and so forth. Some characters are neutral, some are negative, some were negative, then became positive or neutral, and it paid off that way. And it relates to this whole thing because it started with one thing that happened to Harry, the boy, named Potter, so on and so forth. So you have Potter here, H plus Harry Potter, whatever the case may be, or the one child Harry Potter that didn't even know he was a magician and all this other stuff in the story. Same thing that is with Star Wars, etc. Right? And why do I bring up Harry Potter? Well, because Harry Potter has a couple things in there that I think are fascinating, right? Remember earlier I spoke about language and things like that, I had the title in here, etc. Now, this is a callback because we're getting to the end of the lesson, but we're going to go ahead and start to put everything that we learned into practice. And what does that mean? Well, and Harry Potter, Slytherin, right? They had something called Parseltongue, right? Remember the P, right? The Parseltongue, and if some of you hear the word parcel, it's not a package, it's the way that they spoke in the movie. A parcel in some other places would be something that a delivery guy would bring to you. It's called a parcel, right? Anyways, Parseltongue was how they spoke to snakes, so on and so forth in the movie, which I thought was hilarious, right? Because, well, the snake was the evil character or the evil way of speaking in a code-like thing because it was attached to something evil in the movie. However, not everything was evil in the movie because, well, Harry was able to speak Parseltongue, so on and so forth, and then the movie takes off from there. But that's not the only thing. Remember, in everyday life, we have slang, right? It's not called Parseltongue, right? It's not from Slytherin, it's called slang or ebonics or so on and so forth, or poetic expression, etc., or a philosophical thought. It's just how you label it. Because, well, people need to put labels on things. Thanks to psychology, we need to be able to identify certain things a certain way. So if you change the label, you change the person's thought of that thing. Therefore, you change the way they have their viewpoint on that thing based upon the label and the understanding of that label. So that's the levels that it goes to, right? So in Parseltongue, that's one thing, and I think it's very interesting because I also said something in another video when I talked about how you look at stuff, right? Because in Parseltongue, you had Slytherin, right? Well, here's the thing about Slytherin, right? It begins with an S. Well, What's so special about this? Well, if you remember lessons 1 through 3 or 4, so on and so forth, this S could look many ways, but how did it get there? Well, let's back up a little bit because I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I did launch videos before. So if you remember the video where I talked about the number 33 being so prominent, so on and so forth, let's ask why, right? You have the number 33. Well, depending on what you're asked to do with this, it depends on what you're going to get. So if I were to take 3 plus 3, that's 6. But if I were to do 3 to the power of 3, well, that would be 9. So 369, which is connected to Nikola Tesla, so on and so forth. So that's 1 there. But now let's apply creativity. If I were to take 1, 3 and flip it around, right? I would have something that looks like this, right? Which could be brackets, so on and so forth, mathematics, or in computer language, you have your brackets on your keyboard. If I push this closer together, I get the number 8, right? And I think this is interesting, right? Why is it interesting? Well, 3 is the third letter, right? C. And this is 2 C's put together, but they don't see it, right? I know that was a lot. I'll back up. Because if I write 1 C here and I do another C here, that's the number 3, and that's the third letter in the alphabet, right? So if I were to now go a step further, so we have 33, 369, we put it together, we get the number 8, etc. But what's so cool about that is I said in the beginning, CL for understanding. So now since we're moving into logic, I don't have to express or explain creativity. You now understand, you have the lessons within you, and you have them, well, online. Now when I go into logic, I won't have to be so caught up on explaining everything else. Because, well, if I were to take C and put that with L, it doesn't look like much until I take the C and I move it closer, right? And now I have an L, and now that makes a D. But if you remember perspective, perception, so on and so forth, and I did mention Da Vinci used mirror writing. So this wouldn't look like a D, it would look like a B, right? Because it would be in the mirror. And if you look into the teachings of spirituality, etc., they talk about music and the utilization of music, and understanding that there's certain things with music and hertz and stuff like that. And decimals, well, that's expressed by dB, right? Now, if you're breaking it down by science and you're in the medical community and you paid attention to the other lessons, you would understand that this only looks this way, but it comes in upside down. So this would actually look like a P, so on and so forth, etc. And then this one would look like either a backward P or the number 9. Now, this is where I would say a butterfly effect comes into place, because even a butterfly that's naked, flapping its wings up and down, can cause an effect somewhere else. At least that's what's said. And if I were to put this all together, you would have, well, if I was an artist, so on and so forth, something that looked like a butterfly, right? And then, of course, it builds upon there. But of course, even if I were to just take this two or these two, it's like, okay, hold on, this looks pretty interesting. Okay, I got this. Looks like a butterfly. Remember, the medical community, we're always moving in one direction or the other. See, the thing is that the ambulance has one job, so they have the Asclepius with one snake spiraling up. They have one job to keep that one thing that's there, so on and so forth, alive. When they get to the hospital, however, there's 2, right? Why is that? Well, I think it's funny when they say men are from Mars and women are from Venus, because, well, if I were to look at those 2 snakes, they're spiraling in different directions, and Mars rotates one direction, the other rotates in the other, meaning clockwise and counterclockwise, and they're supposed to take care of the very thing that shot out of both of them, no pun intended. But if you catch the drift, right? Because it's about mating, right? So take a look at this. Definitely thoroughly absorb it. I know it was a lot. I know there was a lot of Harry Potter analogies, and there were some entendres in there, so on and so forth. But remember this. And I did mention Star Wars, and why is that? Well, because I did do well in physics, and well, in physics, force, if I remember correctly, is signified with the letter N, which would be Newton's whatever, right? Force. But depending on how you look at it, does it look like the letter N or does it look like the letter Z? Anyways, this has been lesson 9. Your practice and your homework is to go out, right? Take and look up all the meanings of the number 9 and the things around you and the things that you say you care about, and see how you can not only just think differently, but just a little bit better, so that everything can go ahead and come out and work for the beauty of, well, everything. Because, well, quite honestly, when I go outside, I don't see beauty anymore. I hear crap on the news. I hear stuff coming out of people, and nobody can appreciate the finer, small things in life. I think once they understand that, they'll understand Christmas and why they do things to see a smile get put on someone's face. Well, this was lesson 9. I will see you guys in lesson 10. I'll hold off on the title, but I'm in the process of working on it. So, till next time, my friends, take care. God bless. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Mwah. I love you.